Minutes before 8 is the time, asking whether the Lionesses, have been given a raw deal in that they had no open top bus and no trip to number 10. David in Leeds says, would you have wanted Boris anywhere near the Lionesses? No, but an open top bus up the Mall to meet the Queen, yes, they absolutely deserve that. Same subject, Ollie says, please don't forget the economics behind sport. Until women support women's sport the same way men support men's, they'll not be paid their due. You say very few people went to the celebration yesterday. 7,000 reported. There'll have been more outside. You go on. I used to play level 2 rugby in Australia. We attracted bigger crowds than the average football attendance. Of course, Harry Kane gets a fortune. He drives shirt sales alone higher than his salary. Shall we stay with money and an eye-watering promise from Liz Truss, who, have to say, is the leading contender within the Conservative Party to be leader of the party, therefore, of course, our Prime Minister. Ms Truss promising a war on Whitehall waste, cutting civil service time off, ending national pay deals and scrapping jobs aimed at increasing inclusion and diversity in the public sector, together worth a cool £11 billion. And goodness knows we realise the coffers the Treasury could do with that at the moment. More detail now from one of her prominent supporters, Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency Minister, appropriate enough, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who joins me now. I appreciate we need to hear more from the mouth of Ms Truss, but what detail can you give us, Mr Rees-Mogg? Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on your programme this morning.
Of course,
well, there are a number of things that you can do. First of all, I'm already working on, as a matter of government policy, getting the civil service back to the numbers it was in 2016. And you can extend that to arm's-length bodies. There's a technical difference between civil servants and public servants, with people doing very, very similar jobs. In broad terms, a civil servant has lower pay and better pension, and a public servant slightly higher pay and a lower pension. But you've got an overlap in jobs that are very similar. If you add those on, you've got about £3.5 billion on the civil servants and about £1.5 billion that you could save on the public servants by going back to the 2016 numbers. And that's excluding, obviously, frontline services. That's not talking about police officers and so on. And then there's the question of whether you can move to regional pay boards so that people are paid competitively in the parts of the country that they're working in, rather than it being based all around London, because a lot of our public life is based around London. And I know you don't call yourself the London Broadcasting Corporation anymore,
we don't.
But London has been perhaps overrepresented in the civil service, and it's important to move away from that. And you get savings not just on the amount you pay, but also on property prices.
How wide do you think the difference is, Mr Rees-Mogg, if you were living in, say, Darlington rather than Dartford? Presumably you're still paying roughly the same for a litre of fuel, aren't you? You're paying roughly the same when you go to Asda or Sainsbury's or Waitrose. Where do you and your colleagues see the savings to be if you're located out of the southeast?
Well, the biggest savings will generally be in housing and in commuting costs. Those in the southeast are likely to be higher because people tend to be travelling greater distances in the southeast, and housing costs are very significantly lower as you move outside London. And if you take those two costs for a working person, those are a very high percentage of monthly spend.
So someone working in Darlington now might have his or her pay trimmed under this, Mr.
No,
Rees-Mogg?
absolutely not. To be completely clear, everybody currently will be grandfathered. And I think that's really important. I think that's important in terms of fairness, that you can't arbitrarily change people's terms and conditions. But it's very sensible, as you restructure the civil service, as you move it away from London, to pay people the commercial rate in the area of the country they live in. This isn't just because it's fair to the taxpayer, and in a cost of living crisis, you need to ensure the taxpayers' money is well spent. It's also fair on the region, because you don't want the state to be the overwhelmingly powerful employer. You want to create areas of excellence where the state is competing fairly with other employers, because levelling up isn't just about moving government jobs, it's crucially about ensuring that other businesses work and prosper in those areas too.
And the other aspect of the £11 billion savings are diversity and inclusion programmes and employment. Do you have more? What sort of things might be going that are currently in place?
Well, it's one of the things actually I'm trying to do, and working closely with some very impressive civil servants on improving the learning and development offering within the civil service so that people learn practical skills that deliver better services, rather than one I came across about check yo privilege, or there was some course that was offered to tell people about witchcraft. I mean, there's such rubbish.
Hold
This
on,
woke
Mr.
rubbish
Rees-Mogg. You're a journalist.
has to go.
You know journalism even better than I do. Tell me more about...
That's not true. You know much more about it.
You learned at the hand of your very esteemed dad. Tell me more about yo privilege and the other one, if you would, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Well, there was a course offered within the Cabinet Office for people that was to check yo privilege. Now, this is something that takes up time of civil servants, which I think can be better spent. The one on witchcraft, I think, was offered on the civil service intranet, fortunately out of hours, so I don't think the cost to the taxpayer was huge. But we shouldn't be using civil service mechanisms to advertise nonsense. What we want people to do is to learn how to be good fraud investigators, which is an area I have some responsibility for, or how to be good commercial negotiators. We need focused learning and development that improves service delivery, not this woke folderol.
It was reported at the weekend that out of the 5 major European countries, Britain has had the least success in attracting workers back behind their desks. Referencing the work you tried to do within government, leaving sort of calling cards, have you failed, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
Well, I think it's something we need to push at. It seems to me it is absolutely ridiculous in areas where the service is not being provided properly that people are still working from home. Why is anybody in the office of the National Guardian working from home when people aren't getting their powers of attorney completed within the reasonable timelines, when probate is delayed? Why is anybody working from home in the passport office? They must all get back to work, and it's up to individual departments to lead this, but it is so important. There is a place for working from home. It can be done in certain areas perfectly well, but it seems to me that unless your department is performing in a first-class manner, you should not be working from home. It should be a privilege for areas that are succeeding, not a default for areas that aren't working.
I always enjoy your candour during our conversations, Mr. Rees-Mogg. I wonder if I can take you back a number of years. This is you and I speaking in June 2018, when I asked whether there might be queues at Dover.
There'll be no need for checks at Dover, but it will be an ability to ensure that the roads keep running around Dover, even if there are delays at Calais. The delays will not be at Dover, they will be at Calais.
The delays will not be at Dover. You'll be aware 2 weeks ago it was actually declared a critical incident. Some people spent 12 hours in their cars, lorry drivers passed out, and children defecated in the lay-by. A response to what you said some years ago, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Well, the response is that the delays are caused by the French.
But you said there'd be no delays at Dover, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, but they are French-created delays.
But they are at Dover,
decided,
Mr. Rees-Mogg. Are you prepared to apologise that you got that wrong?
Yes, of course I got that wrong, but I got it wrong for the right reason, if I may put it that way.
Do expand.
The point I was making was that the only delays would be caused by the French if they decided not to allow British people to pass through freely. They have decided to do that. They failed to get people to turn up. And that is what caused the delays in Dover, because we have juxtaposed border controls, which means that we check people in Calais and the French check people in Dover. And actually, that means that if the French don't operate their system properly, we get the delays. It's why I was saying that British people might think that going to Portugal is more fun, because the Portuguese want us to go and the French are being very difficult. And why should we go and spend our hard-earned money in France if the French don't want us?
Are you suggesting we boycott one of our closest European neighbours, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
I'm not suggesting a boycott. I'm just suggesting that Portugal has made e-gates available to British tourists, and that there's something to be said for supporting people who support you.
What about the hauliers, though? I understand they still report, and they don't, of course, have a choice. They have to get their goods through Calais. They still report delays at Dover. This has been an unfortunate consequence of Brexit, has it not, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
Well, it's been a French decision to hold things up. We've done the opposite. We have ensured the flow of goods coming into the United Kingdom because that benefits British consumers and British trade.
Other matters, I've got another minute with you, hopefully. You have a sharp city brain. BP, the latest energy giant to report soaring profits. You've been on the round. You might not have heard the figure. It's £8.5 billion. You'll be aware... dollars, I'm so sorry, dollars. You'll be aware Shell was doubled last week, $11.5 billion. More windfall taxes, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
Well, I'm not in favour of windfall taxes. The energy industry is enormously cyclical. But bear in mind, early on in the pandemic, the oil price was actually below zero. So oil companies had to pay people to take their oil away. You need to have a profitable oil sector so that it can invest in extracting energy.
But they've already got investments planned in. They've got their R&D, as I think it's called, already priced in, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
And we need more of it. We need to be looking at shale gas. We need to be extracting as much energy as we possibly can domestically, because that has an effect on the domestic price. Bear in mind that historically, the domestic price used to be much more important in the UK than the international price. And by not maximising the exploitation of our own resources, we have become more dependent on the international price, and that's pushed prices up massively. The US has a much lower price for gas because it's dependent on its own internal resources, particularly shale gas.
Last couple of questions. You are supporting Liz Truss, as I mentioned right at the start of our conversation. Not exactly a huge fan of Brexit initially. What's attracted you to Ms Truss?
In office, as Brexit Opportunities Minister, other than the Prime Minister himself, no minister has given me greater support in trying to deliver Brexit opportunities. She has shown great commitment to it, and in the Cabinet Committee she chairs, she has been fully supportive.
And lastly, her opponent, Rishi Sunak. How would you rate his performance as Chancellor out of 10?
Well, I don't want to be personally disagreeable about
I'm not asking you to be disagreeable, respect. I'm asking for a grade, Mr. Rees-Mogg. You're a candid bloke.
What I would say is I think the Treasury orthodoxy has proved wrong. I was opposed to the national insurance increase. I think increasing corporation tax at this point, when you need the economy to be growing, is a really rotten policy. And you have to bear in mind that when George Osborne reduced it, it led to more revenue, both as a percentage of GDP and in cash terms. So I think those two policies were a great mistake, and we have had, I'm afraid, the dead hand of orthodox Treasury thinking, rather than the type of thinking that Nigel Lawson managed or Margaret Thatcher managed, that ensured that the economy could grow and the public finances be kept under control. So I am not somebody who is waving the flag for his performance as Chancellor.
Grateful for your time as ever. Thank you, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Brexit Opportunities Government Efficiency Minister, appearing here on LBC late to those news headlines, 8:04.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.